Outa-space, International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. On this week's show, being alone, misunderstood and depressed, is this an artistic resource? Comment and analysis from the space station with Paranoid Paul, and music this week from David MacKenzie, Luminosity. Okay then, so today I'm joined by David MacKenzie. David is a multi-musician, performer of electronic music, songwriter, has worked in theatre and has done a fair bit of sound engineering in his time as well. So that's David. Hi, how you doing, first of all? Are you all right?
Well, really well. Nice to be here. Nice to see you.
Cool, man. So that's who I think you are. Who do you think you are?
It's a great question because, I think ultimately I'm an artist working in music primarily, although I think that extends to other disciplines as well. I think my creative thinking can be involved in multiple mediums, but I regard myself as a truth seeker, an independent thinker. I believe in love as being the most important resource that human beings have. And I'm interested in storytelling and alternative ways at looking at the world.
Cool, man. No, that's really interesting. So I actually, that's what I want to know about, really. I mean, I want to know what inspires and compels you to create your work, and we'll generate a bit of a discussion around those issues. But I think maybe a good way to sort of introduce it is that I want to read your bio out a bit. I want to sort of quote it, and then I want to ask you a couple of questions about it. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to read out your bio, and it says,
Sure.
My music is a resource for the listener, a connection through time and space, and a source of positive inspiration. There have been points in my life which I have felt alone and misunderstood. This is where the music became a powerful resource for me, a source of euphoria and escape. Since then, I have dedicated my life to giving this gift of musical resource back and being there for listeners in a way that other artists were there for me. So that's pretty heavy stuff, Dave. It's pretty good. And it goes along with what you just introduced yourself as well. But I want to kind of unpick that a little bit, yeah. Maybe in two parts, And the first bit I want to touch on is the bit where you talk about I have felt alone and misunderstood, and the reason why I want to ask you about that is because on this show we're trying to understand the essence of what the artist is, also the political essence of the world that it sits in, and artists are quite often misunderstood. We're quite often seen and have the reputation of being, a little bit unhinged occasionally, or maybe chaotic, or, difficult, or suffering from depression, or we cut our ears off, or we do strange things. And, and fundamentally there's this idea that, maybe artists are, really, they're depressed people or whatever, and this kind of stuff. Anyway, I pose that in that way because I want to ask you that question. About what inspires and compels you, but what is it about the being alone or misunderstood? Where does that come from?
I think just reaching into myself and, thinking about my childhood. I think a lot of these things, a lot of these resources that we can use as adults can come from experiences as children. And I have thought long and deep about my experience as a child, and what my experience was of the emotions of my parents and my family and people around me. I think that's been a real shaping part of me as a person now as an adult. And I think what drives me, one of the things that really drives me is the realization perhaps that a lot of my my actions and my decisions of my life as an adult has kind of led from essentially wanting to help my parents, because they were, when they were suffering. I think when we're children, we're like emotional sponges, and I think we just pick up on all of these tiny nuances. And I could sense with my parents, they both had mental illness, and this is relevant to the way that you asked that question as well. And they had these difficulties in their lives emotionally, and I was from a very young age picking up on that. And I think it's kind of driven me to want to, in some senses, as an adult, provide resources to them. Obviously, they're no longer alive, so and it's no longer really about them now at this stage. It's more about my understanding of that resource that is needed in people. And I think we all feel like that. We all feel alone and misunderstood to varying degrees. I think it's part of the human condition. And for me, growing up, the arts and music was something that I interacted with from a very young age, because my parents were very influenced by them, especially my mother. And through the arts and through music and through painting and through photography, my mum would change. She would light up. Her aura would light up. When she was having conversations about things that she were passionate about. And it made a big imprint on me, and it made me realize that there was something else to it that brought another layer of resource to people, that helped them through hard times, and gave them the strength to emotional strength, and knowledge to help them be more fulfilled in their lives, really.
It is in a sense important to understand the role of mental illness and art, I think. You talked a little bit about helping them. If you wanted to, you could explain a little bit more about how the mental illness affected you, because you talked to as if you were a carer of them, and that you saw that art inspired them, particularly your mum, and that gave you the door towards art. Is that kind of what you were saying? I think, would that be right?
I think that's definitely a big part of it. I think having those experiences of them, suffering essentially, being my mum, had depression. My dad was bipolar. So, and my family was complicated as well. There's a lot of complicated relationships. It was a difficult period of my mum's life when just after I was born. She was she was in bed for a couple of years. So I think growing up around that kind of chaos, in some senses, even though I was grounded in a very kind of middle class environment that had comforts and luxuries and that kind of thing. I never went without food or anything like that. It was more the emotional resources, I think, that were lacking at times. And I think it just very impactful on me as a young person. I think, I could see this. I might not have been able to have intellectually explained what was going on, but I think I could have an emotional understanding of it. And I think that's the way that I see music and art as being, is that kind of resource, essentially. And that kind of ties into my bio and my work and my mission statement and what I'm about. Because I think it's a resource for people when they feel alone and misunderstood, to put on a record and hear their favorite artist, and to just have that sense like, oh, well, there's someone else out there that's like me. And I'm not alone. There are other people who are experiencing these kind of things.
I think that's that's something that maybe is good to develop a little bit. I mean, why, I mean, obviously the relationships that you've talked about affected you, and maybe in your life too, that, maybe there's been some recurring issues. I don't know. But actually I think everybody can understand that point when you're feeling low, you're feeling not your full ticket, and you put on your favorite song kind of thing, and it picks you up. And what I'm interested in really in asking though is, you as an artist, you've come to understand your art in this context, and yourself in this context. But how do you think what's the connection? How does that work? How do you go from, oh God, I've had a hard time, I'm emotionally a bit fucked up, just like a lot of other people? How does that go to dedicating your life to music? How does one jump to the other, if you know what I'm saying? Why do you make that decision?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I think there's a sense of being out in the wilderness, being out in the unknown. Being in a situation where you are unsure of the place that you're in, and you just don't have the knowledge. And I think that forces you to kind of look outwardly or really inwardly to try and find kind of answers in some senses to things. I think we're truth seekers.
Mm.
We're looking for that information that will give us knowledge and understanding of ourselves. So I think perhaps that opened the door to this exploration of art and literature and music, as being something that I could feel had some kind of answer, perhaps not in language. I mean, lots of the music I listen to is, and the music I make is instrumental as well. It's not words.
Mm.
But I think it's answers in some ways, answers some of those questions, because I think with the process of art and creating music, and the processes that we go through are in unconscious ones. I think the process for me is completely unconscious in terms of writing. I'll spend lots of time thinking about ideas and concepts. But ultimately, when I sit down to write, at my keyboard with my synthesizers and my setup, I'm really looking to really go into a sense of flow and really just connect with my deeper self, the unconscious, when I'm working there. And I think the unconscious part of us is so powerful. They say that it's 75% of all of our intelligence is based in an unconscious place in our minds. So it's really I really like the David Lynch kind of analogy of diving into the ocean. And the deeper you dive down, the bigger and weirder the fish get.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's cool.
Bring them back to the surface. So I think
one of the aspects of this podcast is it's got many sides, but one of them is to understand what an artist is. And, I've had some conversations with people and they go, oh, well, I'm not a fucking artist. They're just a bunch of fucking idiots, or, it was a bit pompous or whatever. And some people, have a split identity on it. And I would say you and me have a shared identity. We call ourselves artists and we're bloody clear about it, but what I'm interested in is why I do that, let alone why you do it. And I think what you were just talking there about the unconscious was interesting to me, because when you think about mental health, and lots of people might link mental health with art, either as a way to make people feel better. You go to art classes if you've had some, a bad turn in your life, and it's a way of expressing yourself and coming out and finding. But there's also the other way, where it seems as artists, we're always on that very fine line, of everything falling apart, because we follow this consciousness, maybe this unconsciousness, where, I'm a great believer that, that art is something we just do, and once it gets commodified, it's already dying. So what am I'm sort of asking a roundabout way a similar question about, what is the artist in this are we just like everybody else, or is everybody an artist? What would you say to that?
I think our existence here on this planet is a creative existence. I know exactly what you're saying with the definition, and I think because there's a lot of, I think with the archetype of the artist is a really interesting thing, because I think you draw certain images in your mind when you think of the artist. I mean, you mentioned a couple of them, chopping off your ear, and being terrible with women,
laying in bed all day. That's another one.
Yeah, lazy, broke.
I'll just stop you there. There's that definition. I remember what's a musician without a girlfriend? Homeless. Now this is terrible. It's a terrible way of working out the homeless problem, or the musician or the artist problem. But it always used to stick in my head, because actually it's a problem for us. It's like, not for us as if we're some kind of special sort of dropout types, but actually if you do follow your dreams in this world and go for them in this big way, like we're kind of told to, it's like the American dream, go for it, man. If you actually do that, you're fucked. So yeah, sorry to interrupt you, because you were on a nice flow, but it just struck me that this is a contradiction that we have to face with this realization. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I think I think it's kind of disempowering, not just for artists, but also for everyone. Because I think one thing that I've really realized over the past year is the kind of story around things, around symbols, really. We're talking about the symbol of the artist, but you could talk about any symbol. And I think you look at literature, and you look at television and Netflix and Hollywood, and they're really kind of reaffirming the myth. I mean, and to a degree the BBC as well, actually, because I listen to a lot of material about composers, and I'm really fascinated, because that's my field.
What you do, yeah.
Just as a research kind of angle, and it's interesting to listen to that, because if you in the story, it's manipulated as being this kind of beat down version of what an artist is. And it is. They're pathetic. They're emotionally inept. They can't make a living.
Not like us.
So I think. Well, I think. One of my missions, is to overcome the chains of this illusion in some senses, because I think that you're told that you're either a creative person or you're not a creative person. You're either business minded or science, or you're an artist, and
you're something. You fit into some box somewhere. You can't kind of be both things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this kind of brings me on to the second. This is kind of entering the second part of your mission statement, as it were. And maybe we could develop that point, because you say in the second part you sort of dedicate your life to these feelings, and basically that's dedicating it to your music and to your arts, but to giving back those resources. You use those kind of words, and I kind of wonder how that fits with the reality of the world, because how does that fit with the capitalist market? How does that fit with individualization? How does that fit with the commoditization of music? And how the hell do you learn a living, in that mindset? So I mean, my question is really, how do you function in the world as it is in front of us? Because we're sitting here, and it's really nice stuff we're talking about, and it's deep, but is it real? Is it reality? Should you not just give up that silly music, Dave, and go and get your job down in Sainsbury's, or use your intelligence somewhere else, or whatever? And the fact is that most musicians do work in Sainsbury's as well. I mean, nothing against Sainsbury's workers at all. The opposite, in fact, that most people are both things. So how do you deal with that question? How do you get around it?
I think it's a great question, and it's something I could talk about for a long time. I've been lucky enough to get these. I've been doing mentoring with DJ Crust for about a year. He's really helped me kind of realize that the truth is that I think really ultimately those things are all the same thing in some senses. How I communicate in a conversation, or how I create a piece of music or a story, or how I handle my finances, or how I engage with more people, and show myself and my work. I think these are all kind of related as one thing, really. I think in the past I tended to take again the artist archetype.
So what you're saying is you're fighting against this idea of separating out your creativity from your day-to-day life. The sort of the dehumanization process. Is that kind of what you're just saying there? I mean, if I'm right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's all encompassing, and I'm really bringing this into every area of my life. Because it's the same mind that creates the work that does everything else, and it's the same mind in my relationships. It's the same mind, in doing a job or relating to someone.
I presume that doesn't mean as you're choosing a tin of beans, you're thinking about different rhythm patterns, or does it mean kind of that? This is. I mean, because you're saying like you've got this sort of like ethos of drowning yourself in the art, and you take it into all other aspects of your life, which I love the sound of. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe we do all do those things, but are you kind of saying coming to terms with those contradictions, or what? Or I think for the listener, they'll be going, yeah, that sounds cool, but what does he actually mean? How does that reflect when he's doing something ordinary? Writing music and the quality music that you do write is not necessarily something everybody does. But what do you do when you're choosing your beans? Do you think, how does that mindset work?
I think it's about flow ultimately, because I mean, from my experience of life, what the great moments in life, the pinnacle moments in life, where everything comes together, everything lines up, and things just happen. I mean, things just work, and it's effortless. You don't have to try to do it. It just manifests itself. And in some senses, and sometimes writing some of the music that I've written, recently, but throughout my whole life, the best pieces have been the ones that I haven't had any problem with my intellectual mind getting in the way. It's just I was able to just allow myself to be in the moment.
So you're talking like the background noise of society, if you like, or the background noise in your own head of what society expected you to be, can fuck up not only your rhythm patterns of your song, but also which beans to choose. Sorry to be going about beans, but this idea that, is that would that be good? I mean, how does that work?
Exactly.
I mean, how do you view capitalism with that? Because this show's about obviously all the issues that face artists, but it's also about uncovering where the workers and social movement, where the movement to change capitalism, how we get our head around that shit, and how do you view capitalism in that context? Is that a way of you dealing with the background noise? Or is that of the system, if you like, or is there some other thing that you think we also have to do on top? You get what I'm saying, yeah?
Yeah, it's a deep question. I think it's I mean, for me, at this stage that I'm at right now, I'm ready to take my career as something that I'm doing as my fullest potential. It's really, I've got part-time jobs that I've been doing for a while, and I've definitely got things out of them, but I know that I can do so much more. And so I think there's a certain amount of me that's kind of letting go of the resistance to the system in some senses, and to just kind of allow the resource part of it to be as much as a part of my growth as in my music and myself, and to be completely sort of connected to it as a total whole system.
Do those jobs that you have to do to pay the bills, I mean, obviously you earn some money from your music, but like most artists, we're in that realm where we do something else that actually pays the bills. Do you think that hampers this freedom that you're looking for, or do you think it adds to it?
I think it has both. It has added to it. I think that there's a reason for it. I mean, there's a reason why we're in the positions that we are in life, right? And I'm very appreciative of the opportunities that I've had to explore these places, and some of them have been jobs, like and I've got it's not really the financial part of it, really. It's like it's more the connections and that I've made with human beings, really. I'm also myself. I think it's learning about who I am through what I'm doing, and so I'm thankful that at this point where I'm at now, it's all about making my music career primary, because I feel that the reason is that I can share more, I can be myself more, I can grow more, and it's
but if it doesn't put food on the table, where does that leave you? I mean, it's a dead straight question, because I know people to go, oh, that's very lucky, he's got privilege, or he's got that. You haven't. I know you haven't, and I know you go to work like the rest of us, and I know you struggle to keep a roof on your head like the rest of us. So the real question is, what price do you pay for these insights, if you like, to how you think the world should be? What price is that? Will you pay any price, or do you pull back from this? Finding yourself?
I think there's a compromise somewhere to make, and I think there's something like something like giving up the old part of myself in some senses to attain what it is. Because I think the whole thing is like, if there's something in our lives that isn't happening for us, it's because on some level we don't believe it to be true. I'm not worthy of it. I'm not.
Is that not the way that this system of capitalism reinforces in many people's heads to keep us in our place?
Yes, well, exactly. Yeah, the conditioning, and that again, that goes back to the archetypes, because we're conditioned from a very early age to have thoughts on things. You're a creative or you're not a creative. You're this or you're that. Good at this, you're not good at this. So yeah, that's been the real battle, and that's been some really, really hard times for me, because I've really had to really go in and ask myself the question, do I really think this, or is this something that I have been conditioned to think? And that's deep stuff, because you have to really tear it apart, and it can be scary, because it's like,
absolutely, yeah. And to be honest, Dave, I really appreciate you sort of opening up a bit on the show, and because the reason I think it's important that you've done that, at least in the short time that we've had to discuss this is something a lot of people are thinking. And certainly a lot of younger people who are coming in and they're finding themselves turned towards the arts, and they're struggling with this contradiction between the society that's in front of them, the pigeonhole they've been put in, and what's driving in their hearts, to be. You know, and I think this is an important question for us to take up as artists and as socialists and as radicals and, you know, people who want to change the system. We have to face up to the fact that actually there's blockages in people's lives, and maybe, although it's a huge subject, maybe mental illness, mental health care, you know, this kind of stuff is maybe it's maybe something we have to take on, you know, to try and understand. I'd like to. We're going to finish this show after we go up to the space station and see our old friend Paul. We're going to finish this show on one of your tracks, Luminosity. Is that right? Is it Luminosity? I've said that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I might give a little introduction to it before it comes on, but I think actually I'd like you, if you can, to see us out of this section of the show, to maybe explain in your own words what that song, what that tune means to you.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. About 11 years ago, my dad and my mother and my grandmother were all diagnosed with terminal illnesses about 6 months apart from each other, and it was mine and my siblings' responsibility to look after them when they were ill, when they were sick, when they were, you know, essentially dying. I looked after my primary concern for a lot of it was my grandmother. I had quite a strong relationship with her. So, you know, I'd go and look after her, and she had dementia and she had Alzheimer's. And so the piece is about this afternoon, and this is about a year before her death, I think. And I was in her front room, and I remember hearing the radio too in the other room, and I remember the smell is this kind of dusty, smoky smell, and it was an afternoon in August, and you know, my grandmother had the light on and the fire on. You know, it was just like unbelievable heat. You know, she'd been through so much pain. You know, her daughter, my mother, had passed away, you know, about a year before this. And my grandmother couldn't solidify this in her mind, you know, so she'd be kind of continuously asking me, you know, is my daughter dead? She was a religious woman, and she believed that she was being punished for her daughter dying before her. So she'd give herself all this incredible pain, you know, for years, really. And in this moment, there was I just remember looking at her in the eyes, and it was like her eyes had just completely cleared, and then I could just see this light, and it was just like all of her pain had just completely melted away. You know, her ego at this moment had completely dropped away and disappeared, and she was so free, and it was so beautiful and amazing. This clarity of her aura and her energy in that moment, you know, it will stay with me forever. And Luminosity is a piece of music that I made, which is exactly that moment.
Wow. Okay, Dave. Well, I don't think there's anything else to say. So thanks for coming on the show. We're going to chat again, I know it. And take good care of yourself now, okay?
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Right, Dave. Bye-bye. So, hey, Paul, how you doing?
I'm all right. I'm up in the station. I'm drinking tea.
Okay,
they got down on the earth.
They have a tea maker up there. They got like a kettle and some milk and everything you need. That's wonderful. So, well, what did you think about the interview with David? How did that one get you?
Well, it feels like we're closing more and more on the great debate of this season, this series, about art, the person and society, and then the political bubble that inevitably is going to have. Because a lot of people think arts and politics are so divorced, don't they? But we're finding out that because the person is at the heart of this, and the person is in society, and their identity as an artist or worker or both, and that's the issue, right? So that's my reaction, because it's a moving and thoughtful interview that I didn't get until I listened to it a second time. And I think maybe that I would never normally give a note to the listener, but I think maybe if they didn't catch it, give it another listen, because it's a subtle interview, this one, I think. I don't know if you feel that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was of a different character to the other shows we've done so far, and I think it brought out another level of questions, and I think you're right. The way you posed that about artists, the society, etc. I think this one did draw on a different energy, if you like, and it was like looking at the thing from another angle. It was meditative, actually, listening to it. On the second time, the first time, I was so shocked by the tragedy, which we're not going to linger on too long, but a tragedy does make artists, doesn't it? And I've listened to David's music. Well, it seems to. Well, I think this is one of the. Well, you say we're both quite tragic. I mean, actually, this is an interesting. Oh my God, let's go slash our wrists. But actually, this is one of the points of this interview, because it came up a number of times, being alone, misunderstood, and how David was talking about those energies, and how he was turning that into a creative form, and how he was doing that in a sense to give back to not just his situation, but in general. And I found that powerful stuff, and funny you say meditative, because I think Dave was into that a little bit, and it was quite thoughtful.
The artist is a stranger in a strange land, and I think David beautifully embodied that and went into some very interesting material about the idea that art is life is art. And this complements very nicely the arguments that you've been pursuing about, why does the artist have to be validated by being utilitarian in society in a financial way? Like, why is an artist only an artist if they make money out of it? I mean, I'm not saying I do what.
Well, I was just thinking, I think Dave made the point twice, it was this idea of he didn't want to be pigeonholed, that he was either creative or either into the sciences, or he was either a house builder or either this. It was like, and I think that's important, because it was like, if you're creative, you are a creative person. And we have talked a little bit about identifying as artists and what that means, but maybe, and we've also talked about it being a general thing that we all are, and I think this interview brought out some of that, as well as some of the causalities of why a person wants to be creative or wants to express themselves. That there's some of the things I drew from it anyway.
He also saw, and this was probably a key thing that I think we should put a pin in and bear in mind throughout the rest of the series. He kind of identified himself as being of service, as being in service to society.
I thought you said absurdist, and I thought absurd.
No, sorry. In service.
Okay,
He used the word resources, which I found really interesting, that he picked on that word. And I think that word's interesting because he means he's a resource. Art energy is a resource he draws on. And then his work is something that's a resource for people that he hopes they can connect with and feel.
This is kind of opposite to the selfish artist, isn't it? It's kind of opposite to the idea that you're tucked away, you're doing just what you want to do, and you don't really care about anybody. You're a bit of a loser and a bit of a loner, and there is this sort of idea in artists, and you're sort of saying, you're sort of showing that Dave's saying something a bit different, that it's something for everybody. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if the farmer grows crops and the painter paints and the poet writes poetry, you know. And I know that there's an issue around the crops being more utilitarianly useful in a very direct, practical issue. But then there's also the fact that why can't the farmer go home from planting crops and write a poem?
Or more the issue, the farmer who's inside his tractor writing a poem as he's cutting the crops about nothing to do with the fucking crops. Maybe the fucking blade going around chopping the hay down, or whatever the farmer does. I must admit, I'm not a farmer person really, but I do see them. They are thinking creatively at that moment. So there isn't this. Why is there this subdivision? You know, what's that about?
Yeah. And then you've got and don't get me wrong, I'm quite prepared to understand that there are a lot of people that are very practical, who have very little, or have discovered in themselves, who may have less of a proclivity for artistic concerns. But I think there are also people that are very practical, who do have artistic concerns and thoughts and experiences, who don't get to tap into it, or it's not encouraged, or maybe, and this may be the point that we're really closing on, or maybe they're vetoed from experiencing, because society dictates that an artistic person is a very specific kind of type, and you're not that type. You're a practical person, or you're a builder, or you're a miner, or you're a carpenter, you know, when actually as beings isn't there capacity in all directions? I know in my sense I'm the least practical person I know, so actually in my case no.
Yeah, but in my sense with my work, you have to be extremely practical. You know, I'm working with power tools all the time. But I got a little question on that though, really, because we're talking about the artists and society and all these kind of things. What about this question of depression and sadness and you know, what was called alone, misunderstood, and where David was talking about pulling this energy, you know, from his life experience of depression questions, or you know, what about all that? Is that what an artist is? Because sometimes that's, you know, I think I mentioned it about the Van Gogh cutting off his ear, and Dave responded to that later in the thing, and that is a symbolic image of what an artist is: somebody unhinged, a bit nutty, a bit dotty, and obviously suffering from mental illness in some way to be an artist.
Yeah.
You know, and I think this is one of the questions I would love for the podcast to develop over a period of time.
Yeah.
And this is the question. Yeah. You know,
I'm just thinking, like, Robert, if you could describe me in such exacting detail.
And maybe myself as well. I mean, I think both of us have had episodes of, and for real, both of us have had our episodes of mental health questions.
Yeah.
But the reason I pose it is it that an artist is drawn, you know, is it that good artists or people who want to be artists have mental health issues, or is it people who have mental health issues are drawn to the arts, or is it something deeper than that in society? What's going on with that? What do you think?
I think because this could be a whole 45-minute show on its own. I'm going to go
45 shows. I would have thought.
Yeah, right. I think the problem is the way we think mental health should be categorized.
Right.
Okay. Now, you have opened Pandora's box.
Okay,
and
let's step in.
My life changed when I read The Divided Self by R.D. Laing. R.D. Laing was this psychiatrist who kind of was a bit of a maverick and a rebel, your kind of guy, and he peeled off from the psychiatric profession and entertained the notion that maybe the people that were being pathologized as being insane and mentally ill and severely depressed were actually having a perfectly rational reaction to a world that was descending into madness. And for this, he is a massive hero to me. Now, his work is vilified by the medical profession. They don't like it. They think it's irresponsible and unscientific. But I think they're misunderstanding what the book is, The Divided Self. The book is actually, I think, more like a work of art. And I think it's a work of art written by, I think it's a speculative work of art written by a psychiatrist who's got some scientific background, a great deal of scientific background. And to answer your question, I think that our problem is this misunderstanding of what mental health is. Now, don't get me wrong. There are illnesses like, say, schizophrenia and bipolar, where there are quite evident psychological delusional issues which need medical treatment. Okay, but what we've done more recently is we seem to have quite cruelly invalidated the complaint that a lot of human beings have with the way society is asking them to comply. And I think if you do that enough, you're going to make people sick. And I think some of those people become artists, thankfully. Some of those people just become so poorly they can't function. Some of those people adapt and maybe grow up with a neurosis about, maybe they have control issues, narcissistic tendencies, which come from this suppression of their natural self. So that's where I join it. I know it's not a neat answer.
Well, no, that's good, Paul. It's like the last thing you say, the natural self, because I think one of the things that we are trying to investigate here is this, what you said before, this political, this personal, this creativity. We're trying to tie all these things together. And I think we can't do that without tackling this question a bit. And I think Dave drew it out in a very nice way for us to open on it, and of course, like you said, there could be, we could have to talk about this a lot, because I don't, it's impossible in a short podcast. There's probably hundreds of podcasts on this question, but it's from the perspective of what an artistic, creative person is in society, what society does to people. These are things we can't avoid. And I think this clarification of what is mental illness is quite important, and I think a lot of people would have an opinion about it, and maybe they should tell us, and
also the people that are the gatekeepers of what mental health is and who diagnose people. That's a whole other thing as well, and that is so similar to all the issues that come along with capitalist society and what I think of as a narcissistic society, which we'll get into at another time. I think, and I think that the last thing I think we should look at before we close it up is the fascinating stuff, which ties in beautifully, just comes right off the back of that, is David's talk about life as art and art as life, and how he doesn't see himself as a worker bee who becomes an artist when he goes home. He says, like, I'm the same person in the supermarket, I'm the same person at work, I'm the same person behind my keyboard. And he has awakened, which I think is a very important, shows spiritual and personal maturity, to the fact that he is, at worst, we're Venn diagrams, at worst, And basically, there's a little bit of the artist in the worker bee, and there's a little bit of the worker bee in the artist, and it's all filtering through. And this shows an awareness of what's a growing sort of spiritual awareness in people, despite the fact that society becomes increasingly secular. There's a kind of a growing, with the help of the internet, funnily enough, a growing awareness of people that we need to be in touch with a kind of, and I'm trying to keep this in a neutral space because it is neutral. It isn't, it's been hijacked, this stuff, by other groups.
You're talking like a metaphysical kind of thing, is that?
Yeah, there's something metaphysical, and I mean that lightly. Like, what I mean is, what if it turned out, right, that all the intuitions that we've always had since we were children and that we've suppressed, what if it turned out all that sense of knowing what's right, despite seeing what's said is right or we're told is right, what if it turned out all that stuff that we thought when we were kids was always right, and all the stuff that we've built on top of it is crap?
Yes. And do you remember the interview we did with Joe Solo? And one of the things he said about working class people just know there's a problem. They feel it in their guts. He made some really, really good little statements on it. And I think I think with Dave, it was more about the flow of the universe sort of approach to that question.
Absolutely.
Which also came out in last week's show. So we're advertising all the shows here, people, with Daniel Terres, because Daniel Terres talked about at the end, I asked him about, this idea, how he saw art as a process, so kind of touching on those things, aren't we?
Definitely. I think, and of course the art process thing is fascinating as well. If that's a shame we didn't have time to get into that last time, but I think you've talked to me about the process of making stone. Is it in Sweden? You were talking about
all my projects actually are a little bit about, when you're making a monument, you're making something that's going to be very static when it's finished. And so for me, that work is very much about broadening it out into like participation projects, and therefore it's about the process, it's about the participation, it's about the motion of living a life, which for me is what is the creation of art.
So there's the process of creating it, which I know what you mean. It's like, for me, and I hope I'm not being trite here, but like for me, it's writing songs, and the best part of a song, there are two great parts to writing a song: the very beginning and the very end, right? And the bit in the middle when you're writing a song is actually the hardest work. But while you're in the hardest work, right, it could land anywhere. It's like it could throw any kind of shadows, right? You're so relieved when it's over and you're so excited when you start, but the fire is in the middle. And this is how you feel about sculpture, right? But here's the thing: you do all that work, and it can be torture, can't it? Being creative. I mean, like when you don't know if you're ever going to finish it. When you don't know when you are stuck, when you actually don't know if you're going to finish the thing. You know what I mean? It's horrible, but it's beautiful. It's crazy.
I think, well, you know what, Paul? I think what you're touching on there is the creative process and the tortured mind.
Yeah.
We've touched a little bit on the mental health issues, the tortured minds. We're talking about this society which is torturing us, and maybe as we start to spin out into space a little bit, and I can hear Jonas's music starting to tell us it's time to shut the fuck up. Maybe we need to come back to this question of how the tortured mind is tortured by the society.
I will close it up very, very tightly with just one or two sentences, if I may, because I'm literally going to nail it with this. I agree that art, the process, look, life is a process, art is a process, the sculpture is a process, the song being written is a process, etc. Right? But when it's finished and we're done, the artist is done, we put our tools down, we put our pen down, we put the mic down, right? We must remember as well, it's fair to say, after all that work we've done, that sculpture, that is going to be viewed by people. And that's when their process starts, when they see the work you finished, when they hear the song that you wrote. That's the beginning of their journey with the piece of work. We are finished with it. And for us, the fire is in the middle. And then by the time we're finished, we're exhausted and we put our tools down and we need to rest, But that isn't the end of the story. All of that fire that was invested in that piece of work, that just starts to burn the first time they see your sculpture or listen to a song. You get me?
I do. And that's what David meant by, I think, that art is a resource.
Yeah, there we go. Brilliant. I think we got it. We're just about beautiful. Well, a great interview. Great interview. Say hi to Dave for me.
Will do. You take care now, Paul. See you soon.
Cheers, man.
So the music this week is going to be by David MacKenzie. This tune is called Luminosity. He completely explained to us the meaning behind this tune in the main interview. So I'm not going to add anything to that. What I will say, though, is if you've been affected in any way by the subject matter in this podcast and want to try and get some support, then we're going to put a few websites in the notes section afterwards, which may help you in beginning to deal with anything you might think you need to. Okay, so we wish you all the love and support, and we'll see you all again next week. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you have something to say to us, or even something to play, or just want to find out more about this podcast, then why don't you contact us on outa-space.com. That's outa-space.com. Alternatively, you can join our Facebook group, which is Outa-space Podcast. Okay, you take care now.